What happens when a fairy tale wedding turns into a public nightmare? On his wedding day, millionaire heir Julian Beaumont looked at his bride Anya, a woman he thought was a poor, simple librarian, and ridiculed her cheap dress in front of hundreds of New York's most elite guests. But he never imagined that the woman standing before him, seemingly small and shamed, was not who she appeared to be. He was about to learn that her secret wasn't her poverty, but a power so immense it could bring his entire family and their empire to its knees. Stay with us for the shocking revelation that no one saw coming. The love story of Julian Beaumont and Anya Sharma was to the elite circles of Manhattan a perplexing anomaly. Julian was the golden heir to the Beaumont Corporation, a real estate empire whose name was etched in steel and glass across the city skyline. With a face that seemed sculpted by gods and a trust fund that could absorb the national debt of a small country, he was New York's most coveted bachelor. Anya, by contrast, was a quiet storm. She was, by all public accounts, a librarian at a small, struggling subscription library in the West Village, a woman who found her riches in the worn spines of classic literature, rather than the cold glitter of diamonds. They met on a rain-slicked Tuesday afternoon. Fleeing a sudden downpour, Julian had ducked into the first available doorway, which happened to belong to the Athenaeum Library, a dusty, charming relic of a bygone era. He found Anya perched on a rolling ladder, lost in a worn copy of 100 Years of Solitude. She didn't seem to notice the water pooling from his $1,000 coat onto the creaking hardwood floor. She didn't seem to notice him at all, which was a first for Julian. Intrigued, he stayed. He asked her for a recommendation, and her eyes, the color of warm honey, lit up. She spoke of books not as objects, but as worlds. Her passion was unpretentious, her intelligence sharp but gentle. For Julian, who was used to the calculated charm of socialites, Anya was a breath of fresh, unpolluted air. He was instantly, irrevocably smitten. Their courtship was a whirlwind conducted in secret pockets of the city. They bypassed the Michelin-starred restaurants and exclusive rooftop bars that were Julian's usual haunts. Instead, they explored hole-in-the-wall ramen shops in the East Village, took long walks through Prospect Park, and spent hours in the quiet sanctity of her library. In these moments, Julian felt a sense of peace he'd never known. Anya saw past the Beaumont name. She saw a man who was burdened by expectation, who had a kind heart buried beneath layers of privilege. She made him laugh. She challenged his views, and she truly listened to the anxieties he rarely voiced. 6 months later, he proposed under the cherry blossoms at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden with a simple, elegant solitaire diamond that had cost more than the library's annual operating budget. Anya hesitated not because of the ring, but because of the world it represented. "Their world is not my world, Julian," she had said softly, her gaze distant. "We'll make our own world." He promised his sincerity, so raw and desperate that she believed him. It was a promise he truly intended to keep. The moment Julian introduced Anya to his family, that promise began to fracture. The meeting was held at the Beaumont penthouse on Park Avenue, a sterile museum of wealth with panoramic views of Central Park. His mother, Genevieve Beaumont, was the family's formidable matriarch, a woman who wore her pearls like armor and whose smile never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. His sister Chloe was the younger, more brittle version of her mother, her personality curated for Instagram, and her conversation limited to gossip and luxury brands. Genevieve surveyed Anya with the critical eye of an appraiser examining a questionable antique. Anya had worn a simple navy blue dress, her only jewelry a pair of small silver earrings. She was polite, articulate, and utterly unintimidated, which seemed to infuriate Genevieve more than anything. A librarian, Genevieve had said the words, dripping with condescension as she swirled her Chardonnay. How quaint. I imagine the benefits are more spiritual than financial. There's value in preserving stories, Mrs. Beaumont, Anya replied evenly. Some things are worth more than money. A noble sentiment, Genevieve sniffed, but nobility doesn't pay the mortgage on a Hamptons estate. Throughout the excruciating dinner, the Beaumont women subjected Anya to 1,000 tiny cuts. They asked invasive questions about her family, no one I'd recognize, I'm sure. Her education, a state school, how resourceful, and her future ambitions, clearly expecting her to say her only ambition was to marry into their fortune. Julian, to his credit, tried to defend her. Mother Anya is the smartest person I've ever met. Chloe, be nice. Anya's work is important. But his protests were weak, his voice lacking the conviction to silence his family's powerful disdain. He was a lion in the boardroom, but a lamb at his mother's dinner table. Anya watched him, her heart aching not at the insults, but at the sight of the man she loved shrinking under his mother's icy glare. As their wedding day approached, the pressure intensified. Genevieve had taken over the planning, transforming their vision of a small, intimate ceremony into a media spectacle, a Beaumont-worthy event. Every decision was a battle. Anya wanted a simple bouquet of wildflowers. Genevieve insisted on a cascade of imported orchids. Anya wanted a small jazz trio. Genevieve booked a full orchestra. There were other stranger moments that Julian couldn't quite place. One evening, while they were discussing the wedding finances, Julian had been complaining about a sudden unexpected crisis in one of their subsidiary companies, Beaumont Logistics. It was facing a hostile takeover bid from a mysterious, aggressive private equity firm. They're called Phoenix Holdings, Julian had vented. They're a ghost. No one knows who runs them, but they're dismantling our defenses from the inside out. Dad is losing his mind. Anya, who had been quietly reading across the room, looked up. Phoenix Holdings, she asked, her tone neutral. They're known for restructuring, not dismantling. They specialize in ethical acquisitions. They buy failing companies, trim the fat, and rebuild them to be stronger. They don't destroy, they resurrect. The previous board at your logistics company was bloated and inefficient. Phoenix probably saw it as a mercy killing that would save thousands of jobs in the long run. Julian stared at her. How do you know all that? Anya shrugged, turning a page in her book. I'm a librarian. Remember, I read a lot. There was a fascinating article in a global finance journal about them a while back. She smiled, a soft, enigmatic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Don't worry, Julian. I'm sure your father knows what he's doing. But her analysis had been so sharp, so incisive, it left Julian feeling unsettled. It was like catching a glimpse of a vast hidden landscape behind a familiar door. He dismissed it, as he always did. She was just his brilliant, bookish Anya. That's all she was. He loved her for her simplicity, for being his escape from the complicated world of finance and power. He didn't realize, not for a moment, that she wasn't his escape from that world. She was its master. The morning of the wedding broke over Manhattan like a fever dream, starkly different for the bride and the groom. In the Beaumont penthouse, the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken anxiety. Julian stood before a floor-to-ceiling window, a glass of champagne already in his hand, watching the city awaken. He was dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, the fabric a shade of black, so deep it seemed to drink the light. His father, Arthur Beaumont, a man whose face was a roadmap of corporate battles won and lost, clapped him on the back. His gesture meant to be reassuring, but feeling more like a transfer of weight. "Big day, son," Arthur said, his voice gruff. "You're making the Beaumont name proud." Julian wasn't so sure. Genevieve swept through the suite like a general commanding her troops, her phone pressed to her ear as she issued a relentless stream of orders to florists, caterers, and planners. She was in her element, a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of extravagance. "I spoke with the photographer," she announced to the room, not looking at anyone in particular. "He knows to focus on our guests. We need shots of the Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers. This is about legacy, Julian. Remember that." Chloe was lounging on a velvet chaise, scrolling through her phone. "Did you see what they're calling it on page 6, The Librarian and the Lion? It's so cringe. I hope her dress isn't from a thrift store." "Chloe, stop it." Julian snapped, his patience wearing thin, but his voice lacked fire. A knot of dread was tightening in his stomach. He loved Anya. He loved her quiet strength, her brilliant mind, her gentle soul. But as the day wore on, her image was becoming fuzzy blurred by the blinding glare of his family's expectations. He found himself seeing her through their eyes, a plain, penniless girl who was inexplicably marrying into their dynasty. 70 blocks south, in a modest but elegant suite, at a boutique hotel in Soho, the atmosphere was an oasis of calm. Anya had booked it herself, politely declining Genevieve's offer of a suite at the plaza, an offer which felt less like a gift and more like a cage. Her only companion was her maid of honor, Lena, a sharp-witted history teacher from her hometown, who viewed the Beaumonts with the deep suspicion they deserved. "Are you sure you don't want to make a run for it?" Lena asked, half joking, as she helped Anya with the final touches. "I've got my car parked downstairs. We could be in Vermont by sundown. I hear the foliage is lovely this time of year." Anya smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her face. "And miss the show? I wouldn't dream of it." Her dress hung from the wardrobe, a vision of breathtaking simplicity. It was an A-line gown of pure, unadorned silk, the color of fresh cream. It had no lace, no beading, no ostentatious train. Its beauty was in its perfect cut, the way the heavy fabric draped, and the quiet confidence it exuded. Anya had designed it herself, a fact she'd kept from the Beaumonts, knowing they wouldn't understand. As she slipped it on, it fit her like a second skin. It was a dress that didn't scream for attention. It commanded it through sheer elegance. Lena let out a low whistle. "Anya, it's stunning. You look like a queen." "That's the idea," Anya said softly, adjusting a strap. Just then, a sharp knock echoed at the door. A hotel bellboy delivered a large flat box from Cartier, wrapped in its iconic red and gold paper. The card was written in Genevieve's imperious script. "My dearest Anya, a bride of the Beaumont family should be properly adorned. We cannot have you looking unembellished. Please wear this. It is a family heirloom." Fondly Genevieve, inside nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a necklace of staggering vulgarity. It was a thick collar of platinum, encrusted with massive square-cut diamonds that flashed with a cold, hard light. It was a piece designed to announce wealth, to choke the wearer with its opulence. It would look grotesque against the clean lines of her dress. It was less a gift and more a gilded leash. "Wow," Lena breathed. "That's the ugliest thing I've ever seen. It looks like something a dictator's wife would wear." Anya looked at the necklace, then at her reflection in the mirror. She saw the simple, elegant woman she was, and the gaudy spectacle Genevieve wanted her to be. With quiet resolve, she closed the box. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice betraying no emotion. "But it doesn't quite go with the dress." She handed the box to the bellboy. "Please return this to Mrs. Beaumont's suite, with my sincerest thanks for her generosity." The rejection, polite as it was, sent shockwaves back to the penthouse. Julian's phone buzzed with an irate text from his mother. "Your bride has refused our family's gift. This is an insult. What kind of game is she playing?" Julian's head throbbed. He didn't understand why Anya would do that. Was it pride? Was it some kind of statement? He called her, his voice tight with stress. "Anya, what's wrong? Mom is furious about the necklace." Her voice came back calm and steady as always. "Julian, it was a lovely gesture, but it wasn't me. The dress is simple. The necklace wasn't. Couldn't you just wear it for her, for me, just for today, to keep the peace?" He pleaded, the weakness in his own voice disgusting him. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When she spoke again, her voice had a new cool edge. "The peace you're asking me to keep, Julian, is not peace. It is surrender. I will not start our marriage by surrendering a piece of myself to please your mother. I will see you at the church." She hung up, leaving Julian staring at his phone, the knot in his stomach now a cold, hard stone. He was caught in a crossfire between the woman he loved and the family he feared. And in that moment, with the champagne buzzing in his head and his mother's anger echoing in his ears, he made a fatal choice. He began, ever so slightly, to resent Anya's strength, mistaking her integrity for stubbornness. The seed of doubt planted by his family was beginning to sprout. St. Patrick's Cathedral, a neo-Gothic titan on Fifth Avenue, had been chosen as the stage for the Beaumont-Sharma wedding. Genevieve had insisted upon its grandeur, a fitting backdrop for what she considered a merger of her family's legacy with something else entirely. The pews were filled with a veritable who's who of New York society. Old money, new money, and titans of industry sat shoulder to shoulder, their collective net worth enough to rival the GDP of a developed nation. The air hummed with anticipation and the scent of 1,000 imported lilies. Julian stood at the altar, his face a mask of strained composure. The orchestra swelled, playing a piece by Wagner that sounded more like a prelude to a battle than a wedding march. Every head turned towards the towering bronze doors at the back of the cathedral. When the doors opened, a collective audible gasp swept through the congregation. It was not a gasp of awe, but of shock. Framed in the archway was Anya, her simple cream dress, a stark, defiant statement against the cathedral's ornate splendor. She was a single perfect pearl, in a room overflowing with costume jewelry. As she began her walk down the long aisle alone, and with a steady, graceful pace, the whispers started. They rippled through the pews like a contagion. "Is that the dress?" A woman with surgically tightened skin hissed to her husband. "It looks like a slip." "I heard she was poor, but this is just sad," another murmured behind a gloved hand. "Genevieve must be having an absolute fit. It's an act of rebellion." The whispers grew louder, less discreet. People weren't even trying to hide their disdain. They gawked openly, their phones held up subtly to capture the spectacle of the pauper bride. From her seat in the front pew, Genevieve's face had hardened into a block of marble. Her smile was a painted-on rictus of fury. Beside her, Chloe looked mortified, physically shrinking into her couture dress as if to distance herself from the approaching embarrassment. Julian watched Anya walk towards him, and his heart warred with itself. A part of him, the part that had fallen in love with her in that dusty library, saw her for what she was, magnificent, pure, and courageous. She was walking through a gauntlet of judgment with her head held high, and she was doing it for him. But another louder part of him, the part that was his mother's son, was consumed by humiliation. He could feel the hundreds of pairs of eyes on them, could hear the snickers and the pitying whispers. He felt their collective judgment as if it were his own. Why couldn't she have just worn the necklace? Why did she have to make everything so difficult? When she reached the altar, he took her hand. It was steady and warm, but his was cold and clammy. He leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper only she could hear. "What were you thinking? Everyone is staring." Anya's honey-colored eyes met his, and for the first time he saw not just love, but a profound and shattering disappointment. "I was thinking," she whispered back, her voice clear and cutting, "that I was marrying a man who would be proud to stand beside me no matter what I was wearing." The ceremony was a blur of empty rituals. The vows they exchanged felt hollow, the words drowned out by the suffocating weight of disapproval in the room. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was polite but tepid. The kiss Julian gave her was brief and passionless. The reception at the plaza's grand ballroom was even worse. The orchestra played champagne, flowed like water, and the mockery became more overt. Julian, desperate to numb the shame and confusion, drank too much too quickly. He was surrounded by his old friends, boisterous finance bros who clapped him on the back and made crude jokes. "Dude, you sure you want to go through with this?" one of them slurred, gesturing towards Anya, who was standing alone, gracefully deflecting the condescending questions of a group of society wives. "It's not too late to get an annulment. My uncle's a lawyer." Genevieve finally cornered Julian by the towering ice sculpture of two swans. "This is a catastrophe," she seethed, her voice low and venomous. "She has made a mockery of this family, a mockery of me. You need to fix this, Julian. You need to show them you're not as weak as she's made you look." Her words, poisoned arrows, found their mark in his alcohol-soaked insecurity. He felt a surge of misplaced anger. It was Anya's fault, her stubbornness, her pride. It was time for the speeches. After a rambling, self-congratulatory toast from Arthur Beaumont, Julian took the stage. He gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. He looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the faces of his world, and then he looked at Anya. She was watching him, a flicker of hope still visible in her eyes. It was a hope he was about to extinguish. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice slightly slurred. "It means the world to us, to the Beaumont family, to have you here." He paused, trying to find the right words. He wanted to appease them, to win back their approval, to show them he was still one of them. He decided to try a joke. He raised his glass towards his bride. "And a toast to my beautiful bride, Anya." His eyes swept over her simple dress, and a cruel, reckless idea took hold. She's living proof that you don't need a $1 million dress to have a $1 million heart. He paused for effect, a smirk playing on his lips. "Though now that the deal is sealed, we'll have to work on getting you a wardrobe to match that new bank account." A dead silence fell over the ballroom. The joke didn't land. It wasn't a joke. It was a public execution. It was a confirmation of everything the guests had been whispering, that she was a gold digger, that he had bought her, and that he was ashamed of her. A few of Julian's cruder friends let out loud snickers, which only amplified the humiliation. Anya didn't flinch. She didn't cry or look away. She simply stood there, her posture perfect as her husband's cruel words washed over her. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by a calm, chilling clarity. She looked at Julian, truly looked at him, and saw him not as the man she loved, but as a weak, frightened boy who had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And in that moment, she knew the wedding was over. The marriage, however, was just beginning, but not in the way anyone could have possibly imagined. In the cavernous, silent ballroom, Anya's composure was a terrifying thing to behold. She did not crumble under the weight of 1,000 judgmental eyes and her own husband's public betrayal. Instead, an almost imperceptible shift occurred. The quiet librarian seemed to recede, replaced by a presence of formidable stillness. She gave Julian a long, steady look, not of anger or hurt, but of clinical assessment. It was the look of a CEO evaluating a failed investment. Julian, seeing that look, felt a cold dread begin to sober him up. He had expected tears, seen something that would confirm her victimhood and, strangely, his power. He got nothing but an unnerving, silent appraisal that made him feel small and insignificant. Just as the awkward silence stretched to a breaking point, a commotion erupted near the ballroom's entrance. The head wedding planner, a woman whose face was a mask of panic, scurried towards the head table, weaving through the stunned guests. She leaned down and whispered frantically to Genevieve Beaumont. "Mrs. Beaumont, I'm so sorry to interrupt," she stammered, her voice trembling. "There's a man here. He's not on the list. He's insisting. He says he has an appointment with the bride." "An appointment?" Genevieve scoffed, her fury momentarily diverted. "This is a wedding, not a dental office. Have security remove him at once." "We can't, madam," the planner squeaked. "His security detail is extensive, and the man, it's Kaito Tanaka." The name dropped into the atmosphere like a bomb. Kaito Tanaka, the legendary reclusive founder and CEO of Innovate Corp, a global technology and investment firm. With a portfolio so vast and influential, it could shift global markets with a single press release. He was a myth, a ghost in the machine of international finance, a man who hadn't made a public appearance in over a decade. His presence in this room was as likely as a meteor strike. Every head swiveled towards the entrance. Kaito Tanaka strode into the ballroom, flanked by two imposing men in sharp, dark suits. He was an older, impeccably dressed Japanese man, his hair a distinguished silver, his face etched with the kind of wisdom and authority that could not be bought. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace that commanded the room's full attention. The whispers now were not of mockery, but of pure, unadulterated awe. Ignoring the gawking Beaumonts entirely, Mr. Tanaka walked directly to the head table. He stopped in front of Anya, bypassed Julian completely, and gave a short, formal bow of profound respect. "Sharma-san," he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "Forgive my intrusion. Your team in the Singapore office notified me of the situation developing here. We felt it could not be allowed to stand." Julian's mind reeled. Her team's Singapore office, Anya inclined her head gracefully. "Thank you for coming, Tanaka-san. Your timing, as always, is impeccable." With a newfound purpose, she turned and walked back towards the stage, her simple dress now seeming less like a mark of poverty and more like a uniform of power. She picked up the microphone Julian had so carelessly discarded. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, clear, and resonated with an authority that silenced every corner of the vast room. "Good evening," she began, her eyes sweeping over the stunned crowd. I believe some introductions are in order. Julian is right. I'm not who you think I am. She paused, letting the anticipation build. My full name is Ananya Sharma, and for the last 7 years, I have not been a librarian. I have been the founder and anonymous CEO of Phoenix Holdings. A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the audience. Phoenix Holdings, the ghost firm, the aggressive, brilliant, and utterly mysterious private equity firm that was the subject of endless speculation on Wall Street. She turned her gaze to her father-in-law, Arthur Beaumont, whose face had gone a ghostly white. Phoenix Holdings is the firm that specializes in what we call ethical acquisitions. We acquire mismanaged or failing companies, and to quote a phrase I once used, we resurrect them. Recently, our portfolio expanded to include a controlling interest in a logistics company that was on the verge of bankruptcy due to years of gross mismanagement. She let that sink in before delivering the final blow. A company called Beaumont Logistics. As of last Thursday, Phoenix Holdings is the majority shareholder of the Beaumont Corporation's single most profitable subsidiary. Which means, Arthur, she said, her voice dropping to a steely quiet, that I am for all intents and purposes your boss. The room erupted in gasps. Genevieve looked as if she had been physically struck, her hand flying to her chest. Chloe's perfectly made-up face was a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. Julian simply stared, his world tilting off its axis. The quiet, simple woman he thought he was magnanimously saving from poverty was in fact the silent titan who had just saved his entire family from financial ruin. Anya then held up her hand, a gesture that once again commanded silence. "And this dress," she said, her voice ringing with passion, "is not a symbol of my poverty. Julian was right about one thing. It is not a $1 million dress. Its value is far greater." She looked out at the sea of faces. "This dress was designed by me. The silk it is made from was the very first bolt produced by a textile mill in rural India that my foundation brought back from the brink of closure, saving over 800 jobs. Its value isn't measured in the diamonds you flaunt, Genevieve. Its value is measured in the livelihoods it represents. This dress is a symbol of real wealth, the power to create, to build, to empower. A concept that this family, with its hollow legacy, will never understand." She was no longer Anya, the librarian. She was Ananya Sharma, the ghost of Wall Street. And she had just taken center stage. The silence that followed Anya's revelation was a physical force, a crushing weight that descended upon the grand ballroom. It was heavier than marble, more profound than the Gothic arches of the cathedral they had just left. In this void, every scraped chair leg, every sharp intake of breath, every rustle of silk was magnified into a thunderclap. The air, once thick with the scent of lilies and entitlement, now reeked of ruin. The guests who, moments before, had been a unified front of sneering judgment were now a fractured collection of individuals staring at the Beaumonts with a new, terrifying expression, a mixture of pity, fascination, and delicious, schadenfreude-laced scorn. The story was already taking shape in their minds, a delectable morsel of gossip so potent it would dominate the social landscape for a generation. The Beaumonts weren't just embarrassed, they were a dynasty in freefall, and everyone had a front-row seat. Julian was a statue carved from regret. The microphone had slipped from his numb fingers, clattering onto the stage with a sharp feedback screech that made several people flinch. The alcohol had boiled away from his system, replaced by the glacial shock of absolute reality. He looked at Anya, this woman standing bathed in the stage light, and he couldn't see her anymore. The gentle, bookish girl who smelled of old paper and rain was gone, utterly consumed by this formidable stranger who spoke of global finance and majority shares with chilling precision. He tried to reconcile the two images, the woman who laughed at his stupid jokes in a hole-in-the-wall ramen shop, and the silent titan who now owned his family's future. His mind fractured under the strain. The chasm between the two was too vast, too humiliating to comprehend. He hadn't just misjudged her. He had failed to perceive her on a fundamental level. Anya's eyes, now devoid of the warm, honeyed light he had cherished, finally settled on him. Her voice, no longer amplified, was soft, yet it sliced through the silence. A blade meant only for him and the head table. "You didn't fall in love with a poor librarian, Julian," she said, her tone one of quiet, clinical finality. "You fell in love with an idea, a fantasy of a simple, fragile girl you could rescue and display like a trophy. You never bothered to see the real woman standing in front of you with all her complexities and her own strength. You weren't strong enough to love her against the whispers of a crowd you despise yet so desperately need." Her movements were slow, deliberate, each one a nail in the coffin of their shared history. She raised her left hand and slowly, with an unwavering grace that was more devastating than any scream, she twisted the simple gold wedding band from her finger. It seemed to catch all the light in the room, a tiny, burning star. She didn't throw it. She didn't drop it. She placed it gently on the pristine white tablecloth next to her untouched champagne flute. The sound was barely audible, a faint click of gold on crystal, but it echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. A definitive, irreversible end. "This marriage," she stated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "This contract is not ratified. Consider our new business arrangement the only tie we have left. My legal team," she said, glancing briefly at the composed Mr. Tanaka, who gave an infinitesimal nod of confirmation, "will be in touch with your fathers on Monday morning to discuss the terms of the transition." Without another word, she turned. Mr. Tanaka moved to her side, a silent, powerful guardian. Her security detail, men who had blended so seamlessly into the background as hotel staff, chauffeurs, and even guests, materialized around her. They formed a subtle but impenetrable cordon, their presence a quiet testament to a world of power the Beaumonts had never even conceived of. They escorted her not as a jilted bride, but as a head of state, leaving a failed summit in a hostile territory. The click of her simple heels on the polished marble floor was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat, marking the end of an era. She walked out of the ballroom, her back straight, her head held high, leaving the smoking ruins of the Beaumont dynasty in her wake. The moment the grand doors closed behind her, the spell shattered. A cacophony of hushed, frantic conversation erupted, the sound of 1,000 vultures descending. Guests began to leave in droves, not out of politeness, but out of a ravenous hunger to be the first to spread the news. Phones, previously hidden, were now out in the open, thumbs flying across screens, dispatching the most sensational piece of gossip in a decade to the digital ether. For the Beaumonts, the nightmare was just beginning. Genevieve, her face a ghastly shade of grey, swayed on her feet, her perfectly manicured hand grabbing the back of a chair for support. "This can't be happening," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. All her life, she had navigated the world through a carefully constructed hierarchy of wealth, bloodlines, and status. Anya had not just torched that world, she had proven it to be a complete fiction, a house of cards built on sand. A former friend, A woman she'd vacationed with in Gstaad, walked past the head table, meeting Genevieve's desperate gaze for a split second before looking away with a dismissive sniff, a cut so swift and brutal it was more painful than a physical blow. Arthur Beaumont, a man used to being the gravitational center of any room, had sunk into his chair, looking decades older. He understood the implications with the cold, hard clarity of a lifelong predator who suddenly finds himself prey. This wasn't just a family scandal. It was a corporate checkmate. He was replaying every interaction with Anya, every seemingly innocent question, every surprisingly sharp observation. He saw it. Now she hadn't been making small talk. She had been performing due diligence. He was facing a coup from his own daughter-in-law, a woman he had dismissed as a decorative but ultimately worthless acquisition. Julian finally moved. A tidal wave of regret so powerful it felt like it was physically crushing his chest, roared to life. He saw it all with horrifying 2020 hindsight. His weakness, his cowardice, his pathetic groveling need for approval from people he didn't even respect. He had been given a gift beyond measure, a brilliant, strong, incredible woman who had for some unknowable reason chosen him, and he had spat on that gift. He had thrown it back in her face for the sake of a cheap joke to appease a room full of jackals. A guttural roar of anguish and fury tore from his throat, a primal sound of a soul breaking. He whirled on his mother, his eyes blazing with a lifetime of repressed resentment. "You!" he snarled, his voice shaking with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "This is your fault. You and your disgusting hollow obsession with status and appearances. You were so threatened by her, so blinded by your own snobbery, you couldn't see what she was." "How was I to know?" Genevieve shrieked back, her carefully constructed composure finally shattering into a million pieces. "She lied to us. She deceived us all." "She didn't lie." Julian yelled the truth of it, searing him from the inside out. He pointed a trembling finger at his mother, then his father, then the empty chair where Anya had sat. "We never asked the right questions. We saw what we wanted to see. A poor little girl we could look down on a blank slate for you to mold into another one of your plastic society dolls. We didn't deserve to know who she was. I didn't deserve her." His chest heaved, his world narrowing to the suffocating confines of the ballroom. He stumbled away from the table, away from his crumbling family and the wreckage of the party. He pushed through the remaining gawking guests, ignoring their stares and whispers, and ran. He ran out of the plaza, bursting onto the streets of Manhattan. The city lights, the skyline that bore his family's name etched in steel and glass, seemed to mock him, a monument to a legacy that had just been proven worthless. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he was running from the unbearable weight of his own failure, the ghost of his own heart, which he had so publicly and foolishly sacrificed on the altar of his family's pride. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs gave out, finally collapsing onto a cold bench in an anonymous, forgotten park, just another broken man in a city that had chewed him up and spit him out. 6 months later, the cover of Forbes magazine was a global declaration of a new era. It featured a photograph of Ananya Sharma that was itself a masterclass in power dynamics. She wasn't smiling. She stood against the floor-to-ceiling window of her Singapore headquarters, the sprawling, futuristic cityscape behind her, looking like a kingdom she had personally willed into existence. Her expression was one of calm, formidable intelligence. The headlines splashed across the image in bold, uncompromising font read, "The Ghost of Wall Street, Ananya Sharma's Silent Empire, comes into the light. The article within was the business world's equivalent of a seismic event. It meticulously detailed her clandestine rise, her formation of Phoenix Holdings from a small venture capital fund into a global powerhouse. It chronicled her philosophy of ethical capitalism, providing concrete examples: the Indian textile mill, a failing biotech firm in Germany. She had turned around a green energy startup in Brazil she had funded. She wasn't just acquiring companies. She was forging a new narrative for wealth, one based on reconstruction rather than demolition. The article painted her as a visionary, a new kind of titan, in a world dominated by old men who played by old rules. She was no longer a secret. She was an icon, and her story became a source of intense fascination and inspiration, particularly for a new generation of entrepreneurs tired of the Beaumont's brand of predatory, legacy-obsessed capitalism. The Beaumont Corporation, meanwhile, was a ghost of a different kind, a hollowed-out shell, yet paradoxically more financially stable than it had been in years. The transition had been swift and brutal. Ananya never set foot in the Beaumont building herself. She worked through her board appointees, a team of sharp, mercilessly efficient executives who descended upon the company like a special forces unit. They dismantled the decades of cronyism and inefficient self-serving practices that had defined Arthur Beaumont's reign. The bloated executive board was trimmed with surgical precision. Friends and family members holding no-show, high-paying jobs were unceremoniously dismissed. Accountability, the concept that had been foreign in the Beaumont ecosystem, was now enforced with ruthless precision. The company was forced to become lean, ethical, and forward-thinking. Arthur and Genevieve Beaumont were forced into a quiet, gilded, and utterly humiliating retirement. Their social standing in New York didn't just fall, it evaporated. Invitations to galas and charity boards dried up. Friends who once clamored for their attention now crossed the street to avoid them. They were relics of a bygone era, made irrelevant not by scandal but by a shift in the very definition of power, a shift orchestrated by the woman they had tried so desperately to shame. Their Park Avenue penthouse felt less like a palace and more like a prison, its panoramic views a constant reminder of the city that had forgotten them. Julian had vanished. In the immediate aftermath, he had sought oblivion at the bottom of a bottle, but the self-pity soured, curdling into a self-disgust that was even more toxic than the alcohol. One bleak morning, he woke up on the floor of his now empty apartment, the silence amplifying the echo of his own colossal failure, and knew he had a choice. He could let his father's name drag him to the bottom of the ocean, or he could cut the anchor and learn how to swim. He chose to swim. The process was a painful stripping away of a life he had never earned. He sold the penthouse, the fleet of sports cars, the collection of ridiculously expensive watches. Each sale felt like a confession, an admission of his own emptiness. He moved into a small, anonymous apartment in Queens, a borough he'd previously only flown over. With the proceeds, he established a small, unpublicized foundation, the Athenaeum Fund, to provide grants for community libraries and literacy programs in low-income neighborhoods. It was his quiet, desperate penance. He started volunteering at a soup kitchen in the Bronx, not for a photo op, but because he needed to be somewhere where the value of a person had nothing to do with their last name. He washed dishes, mopped floors, and listened. He listened to the stories of people who had faced real hardship, eviction, illness, the daily grind of poverty, and for the first time in his life, he began to understand the world Anya had tried to show him. He learned the quiet dignity in the face of suffering, the resilience of the human spirit, and the profound hollowness of the life he had once cherished. He became a man worthy of the librarian he thought he had married, long after he had lost the CEO she truly was. After months of this quiet, anonymous work, he felt he had finally earned the right to apologize, not to win her back, not to seek absolution, but simply to close the circle of his own disgrace. He sat down at a cheap kitchen table under the light of a single bare bulb and wrote a letter, not on his family's crested stationery, but on a simple piece of notebook paper, the kind he'd seen kids using in the library he was now funding. He didn't make excuses or beg for forgiveness. He simply owned his weakness, his cruelty, his blindness, with a stark honesty that had been absent from his entire life. Anya, there is nothing I can say that can undo the damage I caused. I have replayed that night 1,000 times, and every time I am disgusted by the man I was. The words I spoke at the reception were not a joke. They were the last pathetic gasp of a coward. I was afraid of my family, of falling short of their hollow expectations. And I now realize I was afraid of you. Not of your power or your money, which I knew nothing about, but of your strength. You were always complete on your own, a self-contained universe of intellect and grace, and I think some broken part of me needed you to be small so that I could feel big. It was a monstrous and unforgivable impulse. I failed you. But more than that, I failed myself. I have spent the last 6 months trying to find the man you thought I could be, the man I promised you I would be under the cherry blossoms. I don't know if he truly exists, but I have to spend the rest of my life trying. I am not writing this to ask for a second chance. I forfeited any right to that the moment I opened my mouth on that stage. I am writing this simply to say that I see you now. I see all of you. The passion, the brilliance, the quiet, unshakable core of you. And you are magnificent. I hope one day you find a man strong enough to stand beside you in the sun. Julian. He folded the simple piece of paper, placed it in a plain envelope, and sent it to the Singapore address listed in the Forbes article. He included no return address and had no expectation of a reply. Thousands of miles away, in her corner office overlooking Marina Bay, Ananya Sharma read the letter. Her global empire hummed around her, a symphony of data streams and market reports, a testament to her vision and her will. She was more powerful and influential than she had ever been, her life full, her purpose clear. She held the simple piece of paper in her hands, reading the words over and over. A single solitary tear, the first she had shed since that disastrous day, traced a slow path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness for what was lost or of pity for the man he had been. It was something far more complex. It was a tear of acknowledgement for the man he was now finally trying to become. It was a tear for the tragedy that his transformation had required her destruction as his catalyst. She walked to the window, the letter held gently in her hand. She looked out at the endless horizon, at the massive container ships navigating the strait, each a tiny empire of its own, each on its own unalterable journey. Her own journey was set. She had proven her point. She had built her world. She had won. Whether Julian's new hard-won path would ever intersect with hers again was a question for another day, perhaps another lifetime. The choice, for the first time, was entirely and unequivocally hers, and that she knew was the only kind of power that truly mattered. Ananya Sharma's story is a powerful reminder that true worth is not measured by designer labels or bank balances, but by integrity, strength, and the courage to be unapologetically yourself. She wasn't just a bride, she was a force of nature who refused to be underestimated. Julian's painful journey shows us that it's never too late to unlearn prejudice and fight to become a better version of ourselves. This story is about looking past the surface and recognizing the hidden empires that exist within everyone. What did you think of Anya's epic revelation? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of inner strength, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas.